Hi there, my name is Meredith White, and on behalf of the Skolt region, that's where I live in the Skolt region, I am going to present some of my favorite weapons of mass instruction. So I teach Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and in working with different organizations, right, like different centers, like the National Foreign Language Center, like Skolt, like ACTFL, it can feel like we have a lot of needs to meet at a lot of the same times. And so I'm going to share in this session, again, called Weapons of Mass Instruction. I have a couple of different objectives for you. And one of them is that you can reflect a little bit differently on how you can maybe level up some of, maybe some of your prompts, maybe some of your rubrics, how you can give opportunities to students to level up things or to at least have more choice within some tasks. And I'm also going to show you, so these weapons of mass instruction are also going to include some of my favorite routines. And they basically entail a lot of, or many of, almost all of my favorite routines. So my other objective is that you can look at what you're already teaching, not go through and like revamp everything and reinvent the wheel. There's no need for that. But thinking about how you organize, how you plan, and maybe some of your resources actually work together in ways that you hadn't previously noticed. And so I'll give you lots of examples from mine where I transition to doing some of these things in my classroom on a daily or a weekly level. And I finally felt like my materials made sense together, if I'm articulating that well, if that makes sense to you. I felt like instead of looking for isolated audio samples, isolated writing prompt, suddenly the things I was using made sense and worked together. And I found it then a little bit easier to change my mind, alter things for the following year, scrap things altogether, like whatever it was, I just found it a little bit easier once I felt like my routines fell into place. So again, I call this, high weapons of mass instruction, making the most of planning, routines, expectations. And I mean that for you as a teacher or as a supervisor, like you as an adult, you as an educator, and for students. So it's everyone's kind of planning routines and expectations. So let's dive in. I think I'm going to hide my face so you can see the full screen, but you may still be able to see my face. You have access to this presentation. So if you go to that green link right there that says bit.ly NFLC Skolt 2020, that will take you directly to these slides. So that means that these resources are linked directly within the slideshow. You should be able to like if I hover over this, for example, if I hover over this right here, you can see, let me find something better to hover over, like right here, you can see that this is hyperlinked and takes you right to the link itself. So if I'm in present mode, I will see that this cursor actually changes. It goes from just the pointy arrow to then the hand, and I can tell that that's a hyperlink. So everything is hyperlinked within the slideshow, and in the speaker notes, I have additional resources and just kind of casual, informal comments, especially as we look now in the middle of a pandemic, right? So like last quarter of school was unbelievable. And I have no idea how we made it out, but we're out now, and it's like a little bit just, I don't know, just unbelievable to think about. So I've also got some modifications as to like, if I show you this resource, here's what it looks like when we're not in a pandemic. The spine to all of this is the ACTFL Six Core Practices. These are ACTFL Six Core Practices, sort of the high leverage habits that when we look at something, if we're going to use a lesson, if we're going to use a resource, if we're going to assess in a certain way, if we're going to, grade in a certain way, can it come back to, can it be linked back to and reinforced, supported by an ACTFL, one of the six core practices or more? So you'll see that I'm going to align all the things that I'll give you and show you, and they all come back to one or more of the six core practices. On the left-hand side, we're just going to go through these, pretty much almost all of them. The last couple get a little bit tricky because of the pandemic, but I'm going to show you and give you a breakdown of all these things. And so notice down the side, that's what I'm going to show you. And then across the top is the six core practices. So there are all six, and this blue checklist kind of shows where I get the most bang for my buck. These are my routines. These are resources that I use really consistently on the left, and across the way It shows, hey, listen, this comes back and supports me in this way and this way. I can, these are all ways that I am teaching toward all 6 core practices. And if I take that same left-hand side column and I just put it outside into like a weekly format, ignore this little formatting here, right? Listen, we make a thing and then we automatically have to adjust the thing. It's teacher life. If there isn't a typo on the copies, you're not doing it right. Because it's always going to be after you've made the copies. So you've got the week laid out here, and I just kind of informally checked off where I use these things. Like our warm-up routine I use every day. Interpretive rubrics, more like a couple of times a week, and so on and so forth. So it just allows you to see, so you don't think you have to do all the things every day, all the time, because nobody is. But sometimes with professional development or different technology tools or different practices, we feel like we have to dive right in, do it all and get in the deep end right away, when really maybe it's a wading pool, or maybe I don't really feel like swimming at all. And I'm just going to go, oh, that seems like a nice resource. No, that won't work. I don't, or I'll try it and it didn't work. Okay. No need to get hung up on things we think are supposed to work, because we know our growth and our professionalism as teachers, as educators, isn't linear. So, feel free to discard or peruse, but this is kind of how I lay out a typical week. So let's dive in. Starting with the ACTFL, NFLC CanDo Statements, they have these great proficiency benchmarks, right? And so looking at not only the communicative ones, but also the intercultural ones, which is so much of our discussions right now, are looking at things like that. Whose stories are we telling? And when we're giving tasks, when we're giving, communicative type things for our students to do, what are the underlying messages? What are the belief systems that are feeding kind of how we're making meaning and how we're asking students to make meaning? So one of the cool things about the CanDo Statements is it shows text type. So you've got fictional text as one example, conversational things, informational text. So not only do you have the proficiency benchmarks, but you've got what they're supposed to be doing with them. And for me, this helped me make sense of a lot of resources, because I saw all audio tracks as equals. So I was like, great, we'll do track 7 tomorrow, track 8, when really they're different kind of texts, even if they come from the textbook, or if I'm going to use, news and slow, or I'm going to use a YouTube video, what kind of text is it? That will help guide what the task is, because now you can see on the side there what a novice is supposed to be able to do, or what an intermediate student is supposed to be able to do, and so on. So the first thing that was on that list was our warm-up routine. We're going to go through this really quickly, so I have linked lots of extra videos and commentary in the speaker notes. But this is the warm-up sheet that my students use. This clicks to the file itself, so go please download it. It's free, it's available, you take it, make it your own, and if you make it better, send it back, because I would love to have a copy. But this is where my students start and end every day of class. So our warm-up is posted just like this. This is a screenshot of, the warm-up for Spanish 1 on October 17th, and that was a Monday. So they're going to do that here. And then at the end of the day, we're going to do a few questions here. And I love the exit card because, as you can see down in the corner, even if you don't, like, Spanish isn't your language, it's really just identification. It goes kind of in the hierarchy, the thinking levels, right? So like you can do grammatical points. You can do your little pop-up grammar. Again, 6 core practices, grammar and context. You can just do identification. I wanted you to get these 5 words today because these were the most important words that we used. Let's just double check that you're not confusing the meals, for example, breakfast, lunch, dinner. That's a thing, learners often confuse, as they just call them the wrong one. Or more cognates, expose them to some cognates. Like I've got, grains on there, fruits. I don't know that I have to teach grain or fruit explicitly because it's a cognate. And so we start here. They pick the option number. They tell me which option number they chose. They choose out of 6 and they're only picking 4. So they say, I want to do number 2. And here, if they write the question and write the answer, they really get the most bang for their buck, because I know that my quizzes or my assessments or my open writing prompts, by the end of the week, I'm kind of a Friday quiz person. I know that these questions all week in the warm-up is pretty much what's on the quiz. So let's say that I write the question of what I normally eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I write my answer. By Thursday night, when I'm studying for the quiz, I've pretty much already written what I'm going to write on the writing quiz. And I wrote the question that prompted me to say that. So I've got all of my answers. They advance throughout the week. And so I have led students, I've scaffolded them in a way towards the assessment, and now they've got a little built-in study guide. So it means you have to go backwards and look at your assessments and go, okay, what kind of questions can I ask to prompt this kind of thinking or this kind of discussion? And then I was able, oops, I'm getting click happy. And then I was able to pull out the exit card questions to also really hone in on certain vocabulary, certain things that will help them level up and advance their answers. And I really like that for kind of keeping myself in check and backward design, because I don't want to be the night before the quiz going, oh no, they don't know this yet. Oh no, I didn't teach that. When I can go back and guide it with questions, and students can do work on one end, like in the moment on the day, and they're not, they feel like they were prepared because the work that they already did in class is actually helping them in the future. So they helped out their present selves, and then their future selves a few days later goes, hey, wow, good for you. I'm glad you did that warm up, So we start here and we end here, usually about Thursdays. So we do 5 questions a day. So I don't post all 20 of these, but you can. And they do about 5 a day. And then by Thursday, go around, have a student scan it using Zipgrade, which you can see the logo here. And bada bing, bada boom, they've not only now made out their own, like they have all the content that they need in a warm-up sheet, but the exit card then has given them a formative assessment that they did a little bit each day. So they didn't do 20 questions all at once. Over the course of the week, they did 4 or 5 a day, depending when you want to scan it. And now they know, like, oh, wait a minute, how did I get number 6 wrong? Okay, cool. Now you can correct it, put it off to the side. Now this resource that we came to every day also helps you in that way. And they can reflect here, reflect on the objectives, and then I can take this up every week if I want, or if not, or every couple weeks, and they can get some feedback on their goals. After the warm-up, I've linked a video here. The warm-up can lead its way to, sort of an input conversation, right? We want to stay in the target language. And if I asked you what you normally eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner, or like down here, what do you like to eat? What don't you like to eat? What do you eat at school? Because some say they don't, right? They're like, oh, disgusting. I don't eat at school. Let's talk about why. So now that I know that you do or don't, I can guide questions and resources so that I can teach you for, how you're actually how these are actually relevant to you. One thing I used to do that is ifaketextmessage.com. So you have to explore these. These are really fun. And texting story. So with ifaketextmessage.com, you can create different text messages. Nicky Jam, who's a famous singer, is we're in love. So don't tell anybody, especially his wife. But we're in love and it's getting pretty serious. And so I like to make different text message conversations between him and me, because I think that's just really funny. And the students roll their eyes. But after they roll their eyes, they keep reading with those same eyes. So that's pretty cool. So I can pull up on the warm-up and go, oh my God, guys, you'll never believe I got a text yesterday. And they're like, collective groan, right? And so you can use this as like a reading, an interpretive reading. You can use this as just an introduction to some characteristics, right? Here he is complimenting me going, oh my God, no, you're perfect too. You're hardworking, you're good looking, you're smart, you're funny. Do you want to go to the movies? I'm pretty sure I had plans. So I turned down Nicky Jam, but he continues to ask all the time. And so you can play with a lot of questioning with that, and you get to decide what the conversation is instead of scouring online for the perfect resource all the time. Because that's exhausting and we'll never find it, right? So sometimes we just have to create it. So that website is ifaketextmessage.com. Another one that's pretty cool is Texting Story. I'm going to come back to that one. Is Texting Story, and you can do the same thing, but it ends up making a video of how the text message conversation transpired. So you could, send these messages. I was physically typing these in, so it recorded like my keystrokes. And then you could also change your mind. So if he's like, hey, if Nicky Jam to me, because here we are, if Nicky Jam says to me, hey, do you want to go to the movies? I might go, oh, yes, of course. And then because it's recording my keystrokes, I could go delete, delete, delete. Oh, sorry, I have plans. Ooh, the plot thickens. Why did I change my mind? Oh, maybe, oh my gosh, Senora actually is married and she, whatever. And you could play with it in terms of storing. Like I put down here, stories, character point of view, author point of view. and add some deeper nuances if you wanted to. If you don't, you could just have a conversation. And it's just another way to get them reading in an interpersonal kind of a sense, but again, interpretively, but within the interpersonal. Those you can end up using on, like, these videos make for a great ed puzzle because you can download them as a video and then either put them in a slideshow like I've done here or save them as an ed puzzle. Now you've made the video for class and you can follow up with the same video and go deeper, which is pretty cool. Or you can do what we did with this text message conversation here, which is we put it on an assessment. So this conversation is a little bit complicated. So we made sure that when they were just filling in the blank with the number that they thought was appropriate, that we went ahead and scaffolded it and gave them those choices. But maybe this is your assessment for like a student with accommodations, to where you go ahead and kind of give them a word bank, but they still have to interpretively read. Now they're looking at a format that's familiar to them because they know what text message conversations look like. I teach high school, so my students know what text message conversations look like. And so they can actually focus instead of just the formatting or like what it is, like the comment. I'm going to move this so you can see the screen a little bit bigger, but you can also still, there we go. So that we're talking to each other, right? They can also see, they're not focused on like, oh, let me read this, whole paragraph or page or whatever. They know what texts look like and they can just like fill in the blanks accordingly. So that's pretty cool. And students do pretty well on this. These don't have to have choices. They could just be open-ended, of course, but this was our first assessment in level 1. So there's a lot it's a high cognitive load to have them read the thing and put in something that makes sense. And you got to be careful when you grade like that because you want to make sure all your colleagues, we try to make sure that all of our colleagues are being consistent with that. So what I think makes sense when they fill in a blank, somebody else might say, but they spelled it wrong or they left off the accent. So you have to be, we work to be aligned in that way. And so we liked the choices for this first one. But that's just one way. So again, using this maybe in class, like using this particular screenshot in class as a springboard, maybe one on Monday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, and then the quiz, or say you use one each day. And this is our text of the day. And then on Friday, you've chosen 2 and they have to, 2 of those same 4, and they have to continue the conversation. Maybe that's the writing assessment is like, okay, keep it going. What happened next? Finish the story. And that's pretty cool because it gives students choice and, options within it. They can infuse their own personality, which we know elevates them on the proficiency levels, but also you've planned enough ahead that you've prepared everything already. And so your resources actually work in a couple of different ways, if that makes sense. You don't just get, they're not just a one-time use kind of thing. You're like, I use the text message, but then also we saw it later in the week. And so moving right along. So those are a couple of interpretive resources that you can use on an assessment or not. And again, these are hyperlinks, so you can play around. So when I look at those interpretive text messages or, anything that they're coming in, right, that they're looking at interpretively. So they're either like reading or listening. I look then, how can they use them interpersonally? How can they use them presentationally? And so if they, for example, read this infographic about snacks, and they're reading about what it means to have a healthy snack. Well, then I want them to talk to somebody and go, okay, let's talk about our own snacking behaviors. So they've gone in, then they're going to go together. Then what's their exit card or writing prompt? What am I giving them feedback on today? Not necessarily a grade, but maybe a grade, but feedback, definitely. Maybe now they're going to go out presentationally and tell me about their eating habits as well as the person that they talk to. Because now they've got to use that information from the infographic. And I basically want to know, are your snacks healthy? Because that's the infographic topic. Are your snacks healthy? And do the person you talk to, are their snacks healthy? So there you go. They have to have understood the interpretive. They have to have had the conversation. And then they have to put it all together to be able to do that presentational effectively. So instead of students doing all these different activities that don't really have anything to do with each other, they're actually able to do a couple of things that directly affect their ability to do that last part. So if it's like, what are we turning in today? If what they're turning in is the writing, and the writing requires that they engage with the interpretive, with the infographic or the article or whatever it is, and it requires that they have a conversation with somebody else, well then cool. Then that's the writing, the proof will be in the pudding and the consequences will be natural. It will be really obvious if they did or didn't do those things. For a long time, I was planning like separate learning episodes, like we're going to use this resource, we're going to use this, we're going to listen to this, and nothing had to do with each other. So when I started looking at how my resources work together and started going, okay, let's try to go in, together, out about sort of the same topic and the same general concept, it became sort of the everyday IPA kind of conversation. And in the speaker notes, I have some pandemic modifications. So some different things you can do for interpretive. For interpretive, I like to have a class Pinterest board too, where I just keep infographics. So you could say, find an infographic, that interests you, ask the following neutral questions that maybe work for all of them, and then tell me about this. And maybe the presentational little writing or speaking is like just a Google form or a Flipgrid video or something like that. If you're hearing me say words and you're like, wait, what was Flipgrid? What was Google for? Let's go back. That's the video is nice, right? We can go back and replay it. But basically just saying there are some pandemic modifications in the speaker notes, which are really handy, as well as a link to Leslie Grand's Pinterest boards, which are are language. They're differentiated by language, and they have just tons of stuff. This is another example that I wanted you to see nice and big on your screen here. So I went back into presentation mode. This is the first day of Spanish 1. So the first day of Spanish 1, I tell them the story, and I illustrate the whole thing, and I do lots of comprehensible input. And the only thing I want is them to be able to introduce themselves. My only objective is that red space. So I first tell them the story. I do a lot of questioning. Then they go around, ask different classmates their names. So they've got, the name. They tell them their name. It's just focusing on what's your name? My name is. Because by the end of class, I want them to write as much of the story as they can. Or by the end of the week, they should be able to rewrite the story, be able to retell it. And my objective presentationally for that day is a little tiny llama that has their name on them. So I purchased this resource from Senorita Spanish, Ashley Mickelson. And again, this was my only objective. What's your name? My name is. So by the end of the first day, we should have a little llama for every student in every class somewhere up here next to mine. So here's mine with mine, and then here's mine where mine actually hangs on my board. So somewhere around here under the Como te llamas, you should have a llama which has what your name is. And that's all I want them to get. But because I already know the grammar, I already know all of the backward design pieces, I'm going to present it in a proficiency-based storytelling kind of scenario. And I've got more, again, more linked in the speaker resources if you're interested in that, if you teach level 1 or specifically Spanish 1. But that's kind of how that in, together, I'm going to do the hand motion so you can see me. That's how that in, together, and out works on like the first day of Spanish 1. So I tell them the story, introduce yourself to each other, then let's put it on paper, right? So that's one example, and I'm going to skip ahead here. So this is day 5. So they have that story all week. And then on the first Friday of the school year, they retell the story. And then about 5 weeks later, they're going to introduce themselves and describe themselves, or 4 weeks later, I should say, and look at what's that first part. Hi, my name is. And like there's really cuts down on misspellings. It cuts down on the me llamo es. It cuts down on all the errors that make Spanish teachers go, oh my gosh. But they're also able to do a lot more because we didn't save it. It doesn't have to save till chapter 3 or unit 3. There's nothing that says we have to wait for certain things. We know what kind of grammar and what structures are late acquired. And so we can just go ahead and introduce them to them, which just doesn't mean they have to be held accountable for them in some ways. And you'll see at the bottom of that writing form, a proficiency rubric that has the different expectations and so on. And so there are ways to do it without, we're not grading it looking at like, 8 verbs and 9, because that's a lot. And again, doesn't really speak to the core practices. So I'm going to skip this one. If you have plenty of 2 more examples here, feel free to peruse them. And again, videos and blog posts are linked in the speaker resources. Looking for an easy interpretive rubric, you got to check out Anne-Marie Chase's ACTFL Proficiency Quick Quiz rubrics. So they are linked here with her website. And then she's also made an electronic version for the pandemic. So if you want to use an infographic or you want to use an audio or a video, but you're not really sure what to do with it, and you're like, oh my gosh, do I now have to make like 10 questions to go with everything? That'll take forever. Well, not necessarily. Some of these open-ended interpretive rubrics really give you an idea, really give you an accurate sense of what your students understand. And you may be surprised because we do have the curse of knowledge. And so we know the language, to the fact where we can teach it. And so it's really easy to forget what students do and do not understand. So, and you can also modify these. These are editable. She gives you an editable version. They're really great. We use them 2 to 3 times a week. And so it also requires that I'm able to come back and whatever I'm showing them interpretively makes sense to the end of the unit or the course or whatever it is. I've really got to have my stuff together in terms of planning to be able to use these. And she's got a really great blog post that tells you how to use it. I'm going to skip this one, but I'm going to leave them in there just because these are a little bit tricky in pandemic, right? Interpersonal. And there are ways to do it. So there are plenty of resources, but I wanted you to have those resources in case you want to modify them for the pandemic. Having them chat about weekends and weekdays and what they did and where they went, right? Also helpful. I have these printed out in my classroom for when we're not in a pandemic, but if you just save them as an image, they're hyperlinked here where you can get an image of each one. And this one's the weekdays only in Spanish, but this one's in several languages. I know German and French for sure. Now you can have students respond maybe in a class discussion, maybe everybody, like the whole class is on Zoom or, Google Meets or whatever it is. And so now you can say, oh, Meredith, where did you go last night? That's a little bit personal, but what did you do yesterday? How was your weekend? Or students can offer up different pieces of information. And that can be pretty cool. Still being able to be done in a pandemic setting or from a distance, which is really neat. So I definitely recommend clicking on those and exploring those. But again, these are things that we use. I use a couple times a week. So I've mentioned Flipgrid. If you want them to respond presentationally, the really great thing about Flipgrid is all they need is a front camera. So there's presentationally speaking, and then you can respond and give video feedback, which they get. And that can be a little bit faster than writing or grading every single one. You can just instead use, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, communicate to students what that means, and then go from there. And it's really easy to keep track of things. Right here, I've put in not only the prompt, but also some scaffolding. So you can put in an exemplar video, like a sample of you modeling it, or just some actual scaffolding that you want them to be aware of. These are some stamps and some rubrics that I use, and these are linked to, again, where you can get these tools. But since we're in the pandemic, I haven't had to give, obviously I'm not stamping and stickering things, but I am still able to highlight, my favorite part, maybe in a Google document, or maybe in, still giving them, using these rubrics that have proficiency levels built in, which is important. So if you click those, you've got electronic resources that you can use and purchase externally. They're not from me, but from amazing thought leaders in our field. And so looking at, again, that like feedback versus a grade, they don't always have to be together. Preferably it's feedback first to me and then grade second, because we do have to give grades. And so speaking of feedback, in this pandemic, I had to give a lot of grade feedback and also keep up with a lot of grades. What all was everyone doing, and were they even doing it? This links to a Google form that you can use if students have done work after a given deadline. And now it keeps it all in one spreadsheet so that you know whose assignments you need to check, and you're not just checking all of the things all of the time, which I found exhausting in the pandemic. So the last part is a couple of things for reflection. These were not on the original slide, but if you're wanting to look and take your thinking a little bit further, you feel pretty good about all those things already, and you can get an idea. I've also pushed you to think about some of your technology tools, because I've mentioned a lot of them here. But also, what are they used for? These are just my favorites by mode. Obviously, there are more out there, but those are my favorites by mode. So I would push you to reflect and categorize technology tools before, coming back to our original session objective. How can you use what you're already using? And there might be some technology tools that you just change your mind on, right? And that's okay. You might go, that Flipgrid looks pretty cool, but I'm already using that. Or I'm already using this other thing. Great. We don't need to all do all the things all the time. And lastly, looking at some organizational pieces here that I've hyperlinked that really helped me during the pandemic and will probably help me again in the fall, because we will likely be some kind of mutual, some kind of hybrid model. So I really appreciate you taking part in this session, and I appreciate being part of the virtual summit. And hopefully you will find useful resources, maybe you have some questions to ask. So don't hesitate in reaching out, because I am definitely available via email, and all of my contact info is linked at the beginning of this slide. So thank you so much.